It's a pleasure to call Belle Ribeiro-Addy to make her maiden speech.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to follow the fantastic maiden speeches of the member for Wolverhampton South West and the member for West Bromwich West, and of course the member for Aberdeen South, and congratulate him on the birth of his new baby. I'm truly humbled and grateful to the people of Streatham for electing me their Member of Parliament, my family, the hard-working members of the Streatham Labour Party who pounded the streets every day, and all of those that voted for me. I don't take this job lightly. It's such a personal honour to be able to represent the community in which I was born and raised and continue to live today. Now, you would have heard many new members over the past few weeks boast about their constituencies, and I've been to many of these great places, but Streatham is undeniably the best. Streatham also covers parts of Balham, Clapham Common, Tulse Hill, and my birthplace, Brixton Hill, and there really is no place like it for its history of activism, community, and faith. We have the longest high street in Europe, an array of independent shops represented by a fantastic Streatham bid, and we hosted the first ever supermarket in this country. One of the oldest train stations, although Southern Rail isn't much to go by now, and one of the last working windmills was actually on Brixton Hill, and of course the iconic Lambeth Town Hall. I want to say a few words about my predecessor. In 2010, I was so encouraged that a young black man who, just like me, was born and bred in Streatham would soon be our MP. They actually went out and campaigned for him. There was also a young woman I was paired with that day who reminded me, who was quite sceptical about party politics at the time, that whilst I was angry about tuition fees and the war in Iraq, that there were many party members who were just like me, and MPs who were also thinking exactly the same thing, but they were able to be members of the Labour Party, and that I could too. That evening I went home, opened up my laptop, and I joined the Labour Party, and the rest is history. So I thank my predecessor Chuka Umunna for getting me out campaigning on that day, and although he may not think much of it now, and of course for his amazing service to the people of Streatham. There is one member of this House that I must mention, our Shadow Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington. Now, I would have never dreamed that I would get the opportunity to work for a living legend, a trailblazer, the first black woman to enter Parliament, and for a black woman in politics there really could be no better mentor, but also no person to put you off wanting to get into politics more. And I see the abuse that she faces, and it has personally affected me. And actually I see the way that some other members in this House treat her. Now, I love her, and you don't have to like her, but you will respect her. I understand that we are here because of her, and many members like me, and Lord Boating, and Bernie Grant, and Keith Vaz, and I'm proud to be part of the most diverse Parliament in history. There are so many of us that people are struggling to tell us apart. But we hope that they fix that really quickly. Now, alongside her, my friends, the Right Honourable Members for Islington North and Hayes and Harlington have been an inspiration. They stand for principled, unfaltering stance on opposing war, cuts and racism over decades. They have consistently supported peace, Palestinian human rights, LGBT rights, opposed austerity, opposed racism and bigotry, regardless of whether it was popular at the time, and regardless of being hounded by the reactionary press, or indeed regardless of whether it was going to win Parliament. To me, they are socialist heroes. They have always been where I aim to be, on the side of the oppressed, not the oppressor, and always on the right side of history. Now, I am proud to be the daughter of Ghanaian migrants, and they're even prouder that myself and my honourable friend, the member for Erith and Thamesmead, are jointly the first women of Ghanaian heritage to sit in this House. The support we have received from the Ghanaian community in the UK and globally has been immeasurable. Ghanaian Brits boast many notable names: Stormzy, June Sarpong, the editor of Vogue, Edward Enninful, and too many others to count. But as I'm often reminded, the most important British Ghanaian to ever walk this earth is, of course, my mum. I cite my heritage not just because it's important to me, but because it underpins my experience in this country, my country, and my fear as racism and other hate crimes are on the rise. Today we're debating global Britain. And you know, there is that saying that if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. And it strikes me that as a country, we cannot begin to fulfill this idea of global Britain until we first address the historic injustices of the British Empire. Injustices including slavery and colonialism. Firstly, because it's the right thing to do, but also because we may soon find ourselves out in the cold if we don't. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst we spent years debating Brexit, and as my friend, the member for Putney, the Honourable Member for Putney has said, engaged in a monumental self-harm, you know that India surpassed the UK to become the 5th richest economy in the world. India, a former British colony where this country presided over a bloody partition, the Amritsar massacre and the Bengal famine. We also see countries in Africa like Ghana, Kenya and Uganda amongst the fastest growing economies in the world. Countries that Britain deliberately underdeveloped, stole resources for and brutally enslaved its people. Madam Deputy Speaker, were you aware that in the mid to late 1700s, over 50 members of this House represented slave plantations? Members of Parliament, just like me, enslaved people that looked just like me. I'm someone who firmly believes that the only way you can tackle an issue is at its very root. And the racism which I and many others in this country face on a daily basis has its very root in these injustices. Not only will this country, my country, not apologise, and by apologise I mean properly apologise, not expressing deep regret. Not only will they not apologise, they have not once offered a form of reparations. Now, people see reparations as some kind of idea of handing over large sums of money, but why could we not start with it today? Simple things like fairer trade. Simple things like returning items that do not belong to us. And simple things like cancelling debts that we have paid over and over again. And I believe the reason for this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is because we only apologise to our equals. We only make amends with our equals. So I have to ask, how can I be equal to every other member in this House when this is how this House treats people that look just like me? Now, whilst billionaires and large corporates find creative ways to dodge their taxes, do you know who doesn't? Most immigrants. The same immigrants that are vilified as this government enforces its hostile environment. The 3 million EU nationals, many of them living in my constituency, another Windrush scandal in the making. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've recently discovered that after the slave trade, this country, our country, my country, took out a loan at the equivalent of £300 billion to pay off slave owners. We only finished paying off that loan in 2015. This means that for decades, the descendants of the enslaved and colonised have been contributing to paying their oppressors. This means, Madam Deputy Speaker, that members of the Windrush generation who are invited here to work paid their taxes to pay off a debt to those that brutally enslaved their ancestors. And for their troubles, some lost their homes and their jobs, were separated from their family, detained, deported, dehumanised, and now denied the dignity of a proper civil compensation scheme. And let's not forget the people of Grenfell Tower. 72 people dead, many more traumatised by the loss of their loved ones and the loss of their homes, a community scarred for generations. This government failed them on its promise to rehouse them in the aftermath of the catastrophe, has failed to remove flammable cladding. They all need justice as equal citizens, and that means bringing those responsible to face the law. Now, I could not let my maiden speech pass without touching on the scourge of knife crime, because the area of Streatham is particularly affected. And whilst I agree we need more policing, we need more community policing, we cannot arrest our way out of this, and we cannot seem to stop it. We need real investment in youth services and real investment in preventative measures. But most of all, we need to be quite frank with ourselves. Because you see, if you live in my area and you are a young black man and you are caught with drugs or arrested with drugs, it's a very different outcome for you. But apparently, if you admit to taking drugs in this House, you may find yourself a candidate in the Conservative Party leadership contest. And nobody seems to care or places the same level of responsibility that they do on you. Now, I'm not judging. I believe that we all need to look at drug reforms. But I also believe there needs to be more equality in how people in this House are treated and the people that we represent are treated. Now, we find ourselves in historic and unprecedented times. It's clear that we cannot carry on our old ways. Half of the wealth of the world is hoarded by the top 1%, and we are more connected than ever. But fake news has ended up as an ally of the powerful. Now, we live in a world where across the pond, you have a leader that cages migrant children, and to our shame, our government has this month voted down refugee children's rights. This country welcomed kinder transport children fleeing the mass murder of millions of Jewish people at the hands of the Nazis. I stand with Lord Dubs, who was one of those children and now opposes the heartless policy of this government. Now, I was proud to speak on this Holocaust Memorial today against the scourge of anti-Semitism and all the forms of racism which allows fascism to thrive on. And I want to make it clear that with fascism rising across Europe, we must all say never again and mean it. But this charity needs to begin at home, and it needs to begin in this House. The case for being more internationalist could not be clearer. Fires are burning in the Arctic, Amazon and Australia, Indonesia. Just like parts of Italy and in Britain, flash floods and heat waves expose people and places to unimaginable risk. My right honourable friend, the member for Islington, led this House to declare a climate emergency, but this government has carried on as if it's business as usual. Brexit, coming tomorrow, looks set to weaken environmental protections unless climate breakdown is confronted. What future will people on our planet have hangs in the balance. This time of crisis is a test of the government's leadership and our duty to protect our citizens. Good leadership will create jobs with a Green New Deal, tackling economic insecurity and ecological crisis in one fell swoop. What leadership is it if we allow this government to bury its head in the sand as if the neoliberal pursuit of the profit for the 1% matters more than living within our planetary means, in the interest of the 99%? Citizens in constituencies like mine in Streatham. Our planet does not have time for this government to check in with Donald Trump and the fossil fuel industry about what we should do. The next generation need real action on the climate crisis. From Britain came the Industrial Revolution. It's now time for us to lead the environmental revolution. Now, in closing, Madam Deputy Speaker, my road to Parliament was not by the well-trodden route of power or privilege or connection or wealth. I was energised as a student activist to stop the fascist BNP and to help stop the deportation of one of my fellow students. And so I'm very proud to have been appointed the Shadow Immigration Minister and continue that fight today. Because my path is not the statistically trodden path of a young black girl from a council estate on Brixton Hill, and that needs to change. And it needs all of us to make sure it does. Thank you.